Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live stream of the LSU Q&A of new head coach Brian Kelly. He was announced over the weekend as LSU's new coach and had his introductory press conference today. And we have both of our advocate LSU writers, Leah Vaughn and Wilson Alexander, there to capture all of that. And guys, how you doing today? And what were some of your first impressions from LSU's presser?
Well, there was a lot of talk about alignment, so it just seems like all the stars aligned for Brian Kelly to come here, and he was excited about a new opportunity to rebuild a program as like a project, I guess.
Yeah, that was the absolute word of the day, alignment. I lost track of how many times Brian Kelly said it. We're going to have to go through the transcription later to count it up, because when he talked every single time about why he left Notre Dame, becoming the first coach to leave Notre Dame for another school in 114 years, not since 1907 had somebody done that, and come to LSU in the process. That was the word that he kept coming back to, was alignment with the university, with the administration, all with a clear vision that Scott Woodward sold him on. And that vision is clearly to sustain the program and win championships. LSU has seen the last three coaches win titles. That's a reason it's an attractive place, but it hasn't been able to maybe completely harness that on a consistent level, really since Nick Saban, who wasn't here that long enough to really see it all the way through. So the hope here is that Brian Kelly will be able to do that, and that's what he kept talking about in his press conference, is coming here to sustain a program for a long time. Obviously, that with that 10-year contract, he'll have the chance to do it.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about alignment and this being the right opportunity. But I want to kind of back it up a little bit and ask you both kind of what your initial reactions were when you heard that Brian Kelly was going to accept the LSU job. So I'll start with you, Wilson. What were your kind of initial reaction to LSU getting the big fish, so to speak, that Scott Woodward talked about throughout the process of searching for LSU's next coach?
Yeah, well, obviously Scott didn't talk at all throughout the process, but he has done that before. And so you sort of look at his somebody's track record, and he kind of explained today after the press conference how, he looks, for past success, because it's an easy way to predict future success. And so you knew he was going to go after a coach, someone like Brian Kelly, but he even admitted today he was surprised when he found out that Brian Kelly would even be entertaining the possibility of leaving Notre Dame, where he'd been for 12 years. And so when he actually finalized the deal, you started to hear some buzz about Brian Kelly. We kind of started first hearing it kind of Saturday during the game a little bit, and then really picked up steam Sunday and then into Monday for sure. And so once it actually started coming out that, okay, this is actually going to happen, I wasn't like floored, but I was still amazed that, someone who has been at Notre Dame as long as he had come to LSU and landed his next head coach, somebody who, it's hard to pull away a sitting head coach at a school like that. I was still amazed and jaw dropped, but I wasn't necessarily shocked by the whole thing, just because I suspected it was a possibility.
Then, Leah, I'll ask you as well the same question. What were your initial thoughts on hearing the news?
I thought it was a weird fit at first, and I think a lot of my friends were kind of texting me like, he's not a recruiter, what is this? He's not from the South. But when you start to think more and more about it, you think about his resume, think about the fact that he actually has had to recruit nationally at a program like Notre Dame, where he is dipping a little bit into Texas, a little bit into Louisiana, a little bit into California. It starts to make more sense. We're like, okay, you put him at a place like LSU, recruiting is not going to be a problem for this guy, because he's had to really make it on his own. He said today in his press conference that, like, I had to fight to get kids from Louisiana. Now it's not so much of a fight. I think the other shock was like, yeah, he's not this like charismatic, outgoing Southern guy that, the LSU fan base has grown used to these past couple of years. And so culturally, I think the memes were circulating all over Twitter, like, what is going to be his first time like with crawfish? What's going to be his first time doing all these little Louisiana things? And so, but think about Nick Saban being from the Midwest. We think about Les Miles being from the Midwest. And so it starts to make sense after a while. But I think my initial reaction was like, really? What? I mean, I really thought that Lincoln Riley or someone else would make a little bit more sense. Someone even like Aranda or Mel Tucker, someone from kind of the tree. But this is really a fresh start for LSU, and I think that LSU could also use some discipline when it comes to administrative things too.
For sure, and kind of want to talk about something that was brought up during the press conference as well, was kind of the timeline of everything that's happening and how it all came together. So I'll start with you, Leah, this time. What sense did you kind of get on that timeline, and how quickly things were able to come together for LSU to get Brian Kelly not only committed to the job but in the building by Monday?
So it seemed like no one really wanted to give any details on the exact timeline. But from what he told us was it took one 45-minute conversation with Scott Woodward for him to be completely sold on the LSU job as a whole. Now, as far as like when he was contacted, Brian did not give any clue. He just said, oh yeah, I let my agent like handle all of that. And then he finally presented the idea to me like a couple days ago. I think that's what I gathered from it. And Scott didn't really give us any more clues afterwards either.
Now, let you hop in on this as well. Wilson, do you have anything to add to that, or was that kind of what you kind of took away from it as well?
Yeah, it's been indicated to us and reported elsewhere that LSU reached out to Brian Kelly early on in this process, and he at first said no. But since then, like Leah mentioned, it's unclear how many conversations they had, when those conversations were taking place. A lot of this stuff gets done through back channels, gets done through those agents. And Woodward has a prior relationship with Brian Kelly's agent, which, I'm sure he has a prior relationship with a lot of agents. He's been doing this for a long time, but that could have maybe helped smooth things over and accelerate things. But yeah, I think in the end, Brian Kelly said that it was sort of presented to him. He said this morning on the Dan Patrick Show, after their last game, and then over the next few days, it just picked up, and it got solidified on Monday when he was out recruiting in California, and he got back on a plane conveniently with his attorney and came back to South Bend. So it's a little bit still, I think, unclear exactly when all the conversations were taking place, when this pursuit started, but it's been indicated to me that something like this wouldn't have happened just overnight, that there would have been a first contact made, and then that it would have continued to build. I mean, Brian Kelly, he said that there was that 45-minute conversation that kind of sealed it for him, but he also mentioned the word conversations, plural, a couple times. And so you get the sense that they had been talking at some point. It's just unsure when.
And then obviously there's been a lot made about his departure from Notre Dame and kind of how that all went down. Did he say much, or did you gather much from that departure? I know that during the press conference he really didn't go into detail about it, but he said he would make sure to talk to his players face to face about things. So I'll start with you, Wilson. What were kind of your I guess kind of thoughts on what he was saying about his departure from Notre Dame and how that all went down?
Yeah, there's been a good bit of good reporting done from Notre Dame, side of things, on how that how that sort of went. It was a very short conversation yesterday. There's been audio obtained of it. It lasted about 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Then he left. He didn't take questions. And Brian sort of said that he was able to get in front of them and tell them he loved them and all that. And he said those things, but it was short. It was at a short and abrupt exit. And you can get the sense reading those stories out of Notre Dame that the universities and the players are hurt, and the university was a little bit shocked. Although Notre Dame athletic director Jack Swarbrick said he wasn't necessarily surprised, because he had just sort of read the tea leaves a little bit over the last few weeks and could tell that maybe Kelly was going to make a change. This thing, I would have just add this caveat though: these things happen in coaching searches. They happen a lot. Brian Kelly has done this before. It does not make him necessarily a bad person. It would maybe handle it different. Other people would handle it differently. But he's not the first, and he certainly won't be the last to make an abrupt exit from his school.
Then, Leah, I'll have you jump in on this one as well. Anything else you could gather kind of from that departure, or anything else in regards to Notre Dame?
Yeah, I think we heard his interview on the Dan Patrick Show this morning that the news broke when he was getting on the plane after visiting a recruit on the West Coast at like 5:30 in the morning or something. And so he was saying Yeah, he wished he would have been able to tell his team before the news went public, but that's just kind of how today's age works. And then he flew right back to South Bend and, of course, had arranged the famous 7 a.m. meeting that everybody was talking about. And, he did say multiple times in the press conference, like, how much he appreciated his time at Notre Dame, how much he believes they are a college football playoff contending team, and how much he believes in those young men, and how there's really no right way to say goodbye. I think that, everybody's going to be upset if you're saying goodbye. No one likes to leave. No one likes when a good person leaves. And he's a guy that won games and he left. And so, of course, people are going to be mad no matter how he leaves a place. I don't think it's my place to place an opinion on how he leaves his team.
Now, kind of want to get to a couple of questions that you guys were able to ask. Lee, you asked him about his development of offensive linemen and sending him to the league. What do you take from that answer that he gave you about the offensive line? And obviously, it's been a huge issue for LSU this season, dealing with constant shuffling and struggles during the season at offensive line.
Yeah, and that's something that I've noticed, and that we gathered together this morning and we're kind of brainstorming some ideas. And so I figured, okay, how is he going to bring that here? Is he going to bring some Midwestern boys down south and develop them? What does he look for and how does he develop them? And he wasn't very detailed, of course, which I wasn't expecting him to, but he did say that a good offensive line is the backbone of a good offense. And obviously, this is a university that very much values offense and production. And that's something that the Tigers have struggled with this year. So I thought that was a key piece that was really important for him to touch on. And plus, I think it was mentioned afterwards that LSU has not had an offensive lineman taken in the first round of the NFL draft since 1997. I'll have to go back and check that. But, and I talked to some recruits last night, and one of them was from the offensive line, and he said, this is a reassuring hire for me because I am an offensive lineman, and I like his reputation for developing people in that position.
And then Wilson, you were obviously able to get the first question of the day, and we kind of talked about it already. The departure for Kelly to come to LSU. What kind of some other nuggets did you get from kind of the press conference that you thought were either significant or worth noting? They was asked kind of a variety of questions throughout.
Yeah, we'll continue to sort of digest it throughout the day, of course. And when a press conference lasts almost 40 minutes, it's maybe hard to think right off the bat. But I guess some of the things that stood out were, he's got a sort of people sort of see him as a bland kind of character maybe, but he's got a little bit of sense of humor to him. He was asked about that transition from to Louisiana, a place that is very unique and not like anywhere else in this country, and that he had never lived in it. He mentioned that he had never been to Notre Dame before the day he was hired, similar to here. The first step that he ever really took in Louisiana was yesterday when the plane landed and he stepped off the ramp. But he he threw up the L at one point, and he said, I know what this means now, and he's going to continue to kind of learn what those things are. So he's kind of got a little bit of a sense of humor to him. He's sort of serious and composed, and I just get the sense that LSU believes he's going to provide stability to a program that hasn't necessarily had it in a while. And that's what they're really hoping for here. And, we'll see if he can do it, but they've certainly hired someone who's shown that they can in the past.
For sure. And I kind of want to ask a follow-up question on that. You talk about stability. How important do you think that is for this program, coming from, 2 years ago winning a national championship? Obviously, last couple of years have been pretty disappointing. So having Kelly, obviously the contract numbers are pretty large, but what does that, and I'll get both of your takes on this, but what do you think that stability or having that sense of stability from Kelly will do for this program going forward?
It's everything. This is, when you think about Scott Woodward is a Baton Rouge guy, went to Catholic High, always tells the story about how he sold peanuts in Tiger Stadium, as a young adult. And he's seen LSU over the years. Even when he was at other places, he's seen LSU, and but particularly since he got here as athletic director in 2019, he has witnessed the single greatest season, arguably in college football history, certainly in LSU history, and then two of the worst seasons since the turn of the century, and two of the worst seasons in history, LSU history, and you can tell that up. When you see that, you want consistency at the top of college football. LSU expects to compete for national championships on an annual basis. It's hard to do that. It might be a little bit more realistic that to get in the playoff every year once it expands. Then LSU, that would really become the expectation. Although I think that a lot of fans would already hope for they need the playoff every year now. But in order to do that, you have to be stable. You have to be consistently winning 10 games and giving yourself a chance. It's hard to win a championship, but if you sit around the top long enough, you're probably going to break through and get one. And if you become a program that's annually contending for that, then maybe you'll get a couple. And so that's everything for LSU right now, is having that kind of a program, not just one good team, but several good teams in a row, so you can show that you can sustain. That word was brought up today, sustain. That's what they want to hear.
And let me interject real quick before I have Leah answer the question. We have a question from Ian, and he asks, would this offer not have been there for Kelly if he would have finished the season at Notre Dame? And Leah, since it wasn't just finished talking, I'll give you a crack at this question if you have an answer for it.
Let's see. I don't know, because he did kind of address this, if I remember correctly, because someone was saying, if Notre Dame was number 3 in the playoff, would you have left? And also, he did take this job after the regular season was over. So I don't know if he, in terms of finishing the season, I don't know if that encompasses like the bowl game, the playoff. But I do think that the fact that, they aren't really guaranteed a playoff spot right now did work in their favor, especially since Cincinnati is still kind of in the picture up there too. And I think the lack of guarantee of making the playoff probably worked in the advantage for LSU. I don't know if Wilson has a take.
Not so much a take. They wanted to get this high. They would have waited for their hire. If Brian Kelly had sort of given them agreement in principle, they might have waited. It's hard to say with absolute certainty on really anything about this search. Scott Woodward keeps everything extremely close to the vest. He does not share information with a lot of people, and those people don't really share that information. This was kept incredibly tight-lipped, as Scott Woodward searches are always done. That being said, because of the early signing period on December 15th, it is incredibly important for colleges to get their coaches in place well before that. You're going to see Oklahoma and Notre Dame it's going to be an interesting case study, what happens at those schools as they are now reacting to the hire, Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly being hired away from those schools, how they're able to handle that transition with only 2 weeks until signing day. Ideally, though, I was told pretty early on, like LSU wants to get a coach in before that, and then have them out on the road recruiting and finish off this class. Now, LSU has somebody helps with that all the time, General Manager Austin Thomas, and he's expected to be retained. He was here at the press conference today. But that was an important kind of factor in all this. At the end of the day, though, Scott Woodward has shown he's willing to push close to deadlines to get the right person in place. And LSU might have waited. I don't know for certain, but obviously now they've got their guy.
And I'll go back to the question about stability that I asked Wilson earlier, and Lee, I'll get your take on it. How important is having Brian Kelly to have that stability for LSU's program? How important do you think it is?
I think after witnessing half a season of instability, since I jumped on this beat mid-season, I'm thinking, wow, it's got to be a relief for the players. And I know that also Brian has a reputation for, a lot of his assistants leaving. I think at Notre Dame there were 3 or so offensive coordinators that left for different jobs elsewhere or head coaching jobs elsewhere. So you'll have a little bit of that. That's to be expected over the years. But given the fact that LSU started this year with a brand new offensive coordinator, brand new defensive coordinator, and just a lot of, changing up the defense, changing up the offense, even changing up the quarterbacks at this point, I think that having some sort of stability, not only in Brian Kelly himself, but also whoever he brings in, hopefully they can stay for a couple of years. And so they can really establish a system that they can stick with And stability is also incredibly important with recruiting, which is why I think we've seen some of these rumors about retaining some people on staff like Kevin Falk and Corey Raymond. I think, a lot of those recruits form those relationships very, very early, especially as early as their freshman or sophomore year. And when it comes to long-term stability, that's going to help with recruiting. That's going to help with keeping the top five recruiting class standard here at LSU.
All right, and we have another question here. What assistant coaches stay? I know that was a question asked, during the press conference, and he didn't give much of an indication there. But do any of you have a take on this question per se?
Yeah, I'll handle this one. As Leah mentioned, Corey Raymond is a name to watch. Kevin Falk is a name to watch. I'd be shocked if Austin Thomas, the general manager, who's more of a Scott Woodward hire, is not retained as well on the personnel side. There was a report this morning that Jack Marucci, who's kind of their analytics guru, is expected to be retained as well. But also look out for Blake Baker. The linebackers coach has been really impressive this year. He was a huge reason that Damone Clark had the season that he did, and has connected well with those players that they have there now. And then also Brad Davis, the offensive line coach, who obviously the offensive line has taken a lot of heat this season. They haven't had a great year, but you have to remember that he's a guy who a lot of teams want. Florida, I've heard, won some. He was at Arkansas. LSU, had to kind of pluck him out of the nowhere in the middle of the summer to fill that position after they fired James Craig, and paid him $830,000 to do it. So that's somebody who that would also maybe be considered to stay on. Past that, though, as Brian Kelly mentioned today, this is going to be a process. You've got two teams that have the postseason games. It would almost maybe be a little bit easier if LSU wasn't making a bowl game, but it is, and is expected to play in one. And but at Notre Dame, obviously, possibly in the playoff if things shake out in a certain way, and Brian Kelly's going to look at Notre Dame's assistants as well, and is reportedly trying to pursue some of them. But this is going to take some time with both of those teams still playing and those coaches still coaching.
All right, final question here from a viewer, from Ian again, and you just mentioned it, Kelly going after some Notre Dame assistants. So Ian asked, any updates on Kelly trying to get DC, the defensive coordinator, and the offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees, as well as Freeman from Notre Dame as well?
So he mentioned in his press conference that he does have an interest in bringing some of his staff from Notre Dame here to LSU. The reports that I've seen this morning say that Notre Dame is trying to retain Freeman. To what capacity, I don't know, because I think he's been rumored as a good pick for next head coach if they choose to go that route and promote from within. As far as Tommy Rees, I think that came out yesterday too. That he has reached out, but Rees has kind of expressed that he really wants to stay in South Bend. But anything can happen, as we all know. So that's something we're going to keep an eye on. But Brian said that he hasn't had any conversations with any of the coaches here yet either. So that could also play a factor in who comes aboard.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for both of your time. We're going to wrap this one up. Both of you guys have some things to get to from the press conference. So make sure to check out all their work on theadvocate.com. They have all the latest information and news on the Brian Kelly hire and all things related to LSU. Thank you guys for joining this Q&A, and we will hopefully do this sometime again. And enjoy the rest of your days, and we'll see you guys later.
Thank you, Devin. Have a good one, man.